The final scene played out not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating slide of a single sheet of paper across a polished mahogany table. Chloe stared at it, her perfectly made-up face contorting into a mask of confusion, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated horror. Her high-powered lawyer, a man she'd assured me would grind me into dust, picked up the document, his own confident smirk faltering as his eyes scanned the text. He looked at me, then at my lawyer, Mark, and then back at the paper as if trying to will it into being something else. Across the table, Chloe's new man, Julian, shifted in his expensive suit, a flicker of unease crossing his features. It was in that moment she finally understood. She had miscalculated on a scale she was not equipped to comprehend. She thought she was leaving a simple man, a boring structural engineer, for a life of glamour and wealth. She didn't realize the entire world she was trying to escape to, and the new one she was running toward, were both built on a foundation I had laid, and a foundation I could demolish with a single word. How did we get here? She should have remembered that I build things for a living. I also know precisely where the load-bearing walls are, and exactly how to bring the whole structure down. My name is David, and for the last 15 years, I had been what most would call a devoted husband. At 42, my life was one of routine and quiet satisfaction. I was a structural engineer, a profession that suited my methodical nature. I found a deep sense of purpose in ensuring that buildings stood strong, that foundations were sound, and that the complex interplay of tension and compression resulted in a stable, enduring structure. I applied the same principles to my life and my marriage. I believed in loyalty, in building something that lasts, in weathering storms together. Our home was a modest but comfortable two-story colonial in a quiet suburb, the kind of place where neighbors wave and kids ride bikes on the sidewalk. I mowed the lawn on Saturdays and fixed leaky faucets myself. I thought this was the life Chloe wanted, the one we had agreed upon when we first met. We had been together since our mid-20s. I was just starting out, working for a large firm, and she was an ambitious assistant at a real estate agency. We shared a tiny apartment and dreams of a stable future. I worked tirelessly, eventually saving enough to start my own firm, Apex Structural Solutions. I never told her the full extent of its success. In the early days, it was because the money was constantly being reinvested. Later, it was because she seemed content with our life, and I saw no reason to complicate it with talk of significant wealth. I paid the bills, managed the investments, and provided a life free of financial worry. She saw my old pickup truck, my simple work clothes, and my calloused hands, and she saw a man who made a decent, but unremarkable living. I never corrected her. I thought it kept us grounded. It was a fatal miscalculation on my part. Over the last few years, a subtle discontent had crept into our home. Chloe had risen in her field, becoming a top agent at a luxury brokerage. She spent her days walking through mansions, dealing with developers and financiers. The world she inhabited during the day was one of bespoke suits, imported cars, and casual extravagance. When she came home, she brought that world's values with her. My simple, stable life began to look, through her eyes, like a failure. Her comments became small, cutting remarks. "Did you see the new car the Hendersons got? Must be nice. My client Julian is taking his wife to Monaco for the weekend. Can you imagine? This old kitchen is so depressing." Each remark was a small crack in our foundation. And I, the engineer, foolishly thought I could patch them over with patience and love. The inciting incident, the moment the entire structure of my life failed, came on our 15th wedding anniversary. I had left work early, a rare occurrence. I'd booked a table at the small Italian restaurant where I first proposed. I bought a simple, elegant diamond necklace, a companion to the earrings I'd given her on our 10th. I walked into the house, the small jewelry box feeling heavy in my pocket. The house was quiet. I assumed she was getting ready in our bedroom. I walked through the living room toward the back of the house and heard her voice through the slightly ajar sliding glass door that led to the patio. She was on the phone, her tone light and conspiratorial. I paused, not wanting to interrupt. "I know, Mom, I know," she said, a laugh in her voice that I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "He's just so, there, all the time. He comes home, he sits in that chair, he reads his boring books. His presence annoys me, a cold knot formed in my stomach. I stood frozen, hidden by the curtain. Honestly, she continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, I wish he'd just disappear forever. The words struck me with physical force. Disappear. Forever. It wasn't just a wish for a divorce. It was a wish for my erasure. Her mother must have said something, because Chloe's tone shifted again, becoming excited, girlish. Oh, Julian is incredible. He understands what I want. We looked at the penthouse at the Azure today. The view is just everything. He said we could be in by Christmas. My mind reeled. The Azure was one of the most exclusive new developments downtown. A project, ironically, that my firm had consulted on for the foundational deep piling design. I just have to play this carefully, Chloe went on. I need to make sure I get the house and enough support to tide me over. My lawyer says with his income I should be set for life. Julian doesn't want a woman who comes with baggage, but he also doesn't want one who is broke. The conversation continued for another few minutes. A brutal dissection of my perceived inadequacies and a detailed plan for her glorious future. She spoke of my predictability as if it were a disease. She laughed about my cluelessness when she finally hung up. I backed away from the door silently. The jewelry box in my pocket felt like a block of ice. The love I felt just moments before had curdled into something cold and hard. I did not feel rage. I did not feel a desire to scream or confront her. The engineer in my mind took over from the husband. A catastrophic structural failure had occurred. The immediate priority was not to mourn the collapse, but to assess the damage, ensure there was no further danger, and then begin the methodical process of demolition and clearing the site. I walked out the front door as quietly as I had entered. I got into my truck and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. The hurt was there, a deep, shearing pain in my chest. But beneath it, a strange and terrible clarity was forming. She didn't just want a divorce. She wanted to strip me of everything she could, using my perceived simplicity against me as a weapon. She and her lover Julian, and her mother, saw me as an obstacle to be dismantled and repurposed for their own gain. They saw me as a resource to be plundered. I drove for an hour until I found myself in the parking lot of a nondescript hotel off the highway. I checked in using my personal credit card, not the joint one. I walked into the sterile, impersonal room, and the anonymity of it was a comfort. I sat on the edge of the bed and took out my phone. I had only one call to make. Mark Anderson had been my best friend since we were freshman roommates in college. He was now one of the sharpest corporate litigators in the state. He knew my real financial situation because he had helped me structure the network of holding companies and trusts that comprised my assets years ago. He answered on the second ring. Dave? Everything okay? You never call this late? I took a breath. My voice was steady, devoid of emotion. It sounded like someone else's. Mark, I need your help. It's Chloe. I told him everything. I repeated the conversation I had overheard, word for word. I didn't embellish. I didn't inject my own pain into the retelling. I delivered it like a field report, a factual account of a critical failure. On the other end of the line, Mark was silent. He let me finish without interruption. When I was done, the silence stretched for a few seconds. Okay, he said finally, his voice calm and professional. First, are you in a safe place? Are you at the house? No, I said. I'm at a hotel. I didn't confront her. I just left. Good, Mark said, a note of approval in his tone. That's very good. Do not talk to her. Do not answer her calls or texts. Let her think you're working late or went out with friends. We need total radio silence from you. Your lack of an emotional reaction is now our most powerful weapon. She's expecting a fight. We're not going to give her 1 inch. That was the turning point. In that moment, listening to Mark's logical, measured advice, I made a conscious decision. I would not allow emotion to govern my actions. Chloe had made a business decision, treating our marriage as a transaction she was now liquidating for a better offer. I would respond in kind. I would treat this not as the end of a marriage, but as a hostile takeover attempt of my life's work. And I would defend it with all the strategic and financial resources at my disposal. The resources she had no idea existed. "What's the first step?" I asked. "The first step is you get some sleep," Mark instructed. "Tomorrow morning, at 8 o'clock sharp, you're going to walk into the downtown branch of Sterling Bank. You're going to ask for a man named Mr. Cole. He's the senior vice president of asset management. You're going to tell him you need to execute Protocol 7. He'll know what that means. I'll call him tonight to give him a heads up. After that, meet me at my office at 10. We'll build the fortress Protocol 7. It was a contingency plan, Mark, and I had set up years ago when my business first became truly valuable. It was designed to protect my assets in the event of a sudden personal catastrophe, a lawsuit, a medical emergency, or a divorce. Executing it would trigger a series of pre-planned financial maneuvers, instantly moving liquid assets, changing ownership structures of properties to corporate entities, and freezing access to any joint accounts, effectively building an impenetrable financial wall around the core of my wealth. Chloe thought she was married to a man who earned maybe $200,000 a year. She was about to try and divorce a corporation she didn't know she was living inside of. I hung up the phone and lay back on the stiff hotel bed. The hurt was still there, a dull, heavy ache. But for the first time, it was accompanied by a sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim of betrayal. I was the architect of a response. The engineer in me was back in control. I wasn't just going to clear the rubble. I was going to redesign the entire landscape. The next morning, I followed Mark's instructions to the letter. At 8, I walked into the bank. I was wearing my usual work jeans and a plain polo shirt. I looked out of place in the marble lobby. Mr. Cole, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, greeted me with professional deference. He led me to a quiet office. I said the words, "I need to execute Protocol 7. He nodded once, slid a single document across the desk for my signature, and it was done. Within minutes, financial walls were being erected, accounts were being firewalled, and control was being consolidated. 10, I was in Mark's office. It was a stark, modern space with a panoramic view of the city. He had a whiteboard already covered in diagrams and notes. He handed me a cup of coffee. "Fortress is under construction," he said. "Now we gather intelligence. I'm hiring a private investigator. A good one. We need photos, videos, records of her and this Julian character. We need to establish a clear pattern of infidelity. It will be crucial for negating any alimony claims based on lifestyle. She thinks our lifestyle is what I earn from my salary," I said. "She has no idea about the corporate income, the rental properties, the investment portfolio." "Exactly," Mark said, pointing a pen at me. "And we are going to maintain that illusion for as long as possible. Her greed will be her undoing. She will make demands based on what she thinks you have, and in doing so, she will expose her entire motivation. We let her build her case on a foundation of sand. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. I moved into a small corporate apartment I owned downtown. To Chloe, I was a ghost. My phone went straight to a new voicemail I set up, one that simply stated my name and that I was unavailable. I did not respond to her frantic texts, which quickly devolved from feigned concern. "David, where are you? I'm so worried," to righteous indignation. "How dare you just disappear? You are such a coward." And finally to threats, "My lawyer will be in touch. You won't get away with this." Each message was forwarded to Mark and logged as evidence. Meanwhile, the private investigator, a former detective named Harris, began his work. His reports were as unembellished and factual as my own internal monologue. They arrived in my inbox every Friday evening as a password-protected PDF. They contained photographs of Chloe and Julian having dinner at expensive restaurants, kissing in the parking garage of her office, entering his penthouse apartment at the Azure and not leaving until the next morning. Harris also provided financial intelligence. Julian Croft was a developer with a reputation for being highly leveraged. He was all flash, his wealth more performance than reality. His current project, the one he was pinning all his hopes on, was financed by a private equity firm named Northwood Capital. I read that name and a slow, Cold smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. I forwarded the report to Mark with a one-line message. Check my file on Northwood Capital. Mark called me within the hour. You have got to be kidding me, he said, a rare note of astonishment in his voice. You're a silent partner. You own 60% of the fund that's financing this guy's entire career. I know, I said. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. The man Chloe saw as her ticket out of a life with me was, in fact, financially beholden to me. He was building his glittering future on my foundation. I continued to work. My days were a refuge of logic and order. I reviewed blueprints, calculated load tolerances, and solved complex engineering problems. The work grounded me. It reminded me of who I was, a builder, a problem solver. My employees at Apex noticed nothing amiss, other than perhaps that I was even more focused than usual. They knew me as Mr. Miller, the quiet, demanding, but fair owner of the company. They had no idea about the personal storm I was weathering. Chloe, in her obliviousness, was making our case for us. Believing my silence was weakness or shame, she grew bolder. She moved Julian into our home, the home I had built and paid for. Harris's reports now included pictures of Julian's Maserati parked in my driveway. They had dinner parties. They redecorated. Chloe's mother, Eleanor, was a frequent guest, beaming with pride at the upgrade her daughter had secured. They were celebrating their victory before the war had even begun. One afternoon, Mark called me. She filed, he said. The petition just came through. It's ambitious. He sent me the document. I read through her demands. She wanted the house free and clear. She wanted permanent, substantial alimony based on a wildly inflated estimate of my income. Claiming I was hiding assets, she wanted half of my retirement savings and my business, which she valued at a pittance, assuming it was just me and a couple of draftsmen. She claimed I had abandoned her, causing her emotional distress. It was a work of pure fiction. This is perfect, I told Mark. She's laid out her entire strategy. It's all based on false premises. She's also claiming you were emotionally abusive, Mark added, his voice tight with anger. Citing your sudden and unexplained disappearance as proof of your instability. That part stung, I had to admit, but I pushed the emotion down. It's just a tactic, I said, more to convince myself than him. It won't stand up to the evidence. The next phase was about building our own offensive. We let her legal team send discovery requests. We responded truthfully, but narrowly. We provided my personal tax returns, which showed a modest salary that I paid myself from the corporation. We provided personal bank statements. We provided nothing about Apex Structural Solutions or the half-dozen holding companies that owned the commercial real estate, the investment funds, and the other assets. Her lawyer, confident he was dealing with a simple case, didn't dig deeper. He saw a blue-collar engineer and took the bait. Chloe's arrogance grew in direct proportion to my silence. She started using the joint credit card again, which I had intentionally left open with a low limit, knowing she would. Every charge was a data point. Dinners with Julian, new clothes, spa days. Mark's team logged every transaction. She was funding her affair with what she thought was my money, creating a perfect paper trail of her infidelity and her materialistic motives. The first time I saw her in person after that day was at the preliminary mediation meeting. It was held in a neutral conference room at a downtown law firm. I arrived with Mark. I wore a simple, off-the-rack suit. I wanted to look exactly like the man she thought I was. She was already there, sitting next to her lawyer. She was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking dress, her hair and makeup flawless. Julian was with her, a silent show of support. He lounged in his chair as if he owned the room, giving me a dismissive, pitying glance. Chloe wouldn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her expression a practiced mask of a wronged woman. Her mother, Eleanor, sat a few chairs down, a purse that cost more than my first car sitting in her lap. Her lawyer, a slick man named Donovan, began the proceedings. He spoke in a condescending tone, outlining their very reasonable demands. He painted a picture of Chloe as a long-suffering wife, trapped with a cold and uncommunicative husband who had cruelly abandoned her. He talked about her emotional trauma. I remained silent, my hands clasped on the table in front of me. I let him talk. I let him build his narrative. When he was finished, he looked at me expectantly. "Well, Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say in response to these serious allegations?" I looked at Chloe for the first time. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and I saw a flicker of something. Not guilt, but a cold triumph. She thought she had won. Cleared my throat. "Yes," I said, my voice even. "I do." I slid a single photograph across the table. It was one of Harris's best. A crystal-clear shot of her and Julian, kissing passionately on the balcony of his penthouse at the Azure. The date and timestamp were clearly visible in the bottom corner. It was dated 2 days before our anniversary. Donovan picked up the photo. His smug expression vanished. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian sat bolt upright, his casual slouch gone. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes wide. "We have about 200 more of those," Mark said calmly, gesturing to a thick binder on the table, with dates, times, and locations meticulously documented. "We also have receipts for hotel rooms, dinners, and gifts, all charged to your joint account, Mrs. Miller. Shall we continue?" Donovan swallowed hard. He looked at Chloe, who was now pale. "This is an invasion of privacy," she stammered. "Is it?" Mark countered. "Or is it evidence of dissipation of marital assets and adultery? I believe the court will find it to be the latter, which, as you know, makes your client's claim for alimony rather difficult to sustain." The confident facade of their team had crumbled. The air in the room shifted. Julian, who had positioned himself as Chloe's powerful protector, now looked deeply uncomfortable. This was not the clean, simple divorce from a sad-sack husband he had signed up for. This was messy. "This changes nothing about the division of property," Donovan blustered, trying to regain control. "The house is still marital property. We can discuss that at the next meeting," Mark said smoothly, closing his binder. "I think we've made our point for today." We stood up to leave. As I walked past Chloe, she hissed at me, her voice a venomous whisper. "You will regret this, David. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I paused and looked down at her. For the first time, I spoke to her directly. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You have no idea who you've been living with." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal maneuvering. Chloe's team was now on the defensive, but they were not giving up. Their strategy shifted. They conceded the infidelity but argued it was a result of my neglect. They doubled down on their demands for the house and assets, now framing it as her rightful share for 15 years of marriage to a difficult man. Julian's presence became scarcer. The public mess was clearly not to his liking. Harris's reports noted that his car was no longer parked at our house overnight. Cracks were appearing in Chloe's new foundation. Her desperation led her to make a critical mistake. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was her. "David? Please don't hang up," she said, her voice strained. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, wheedling tone. "We need to talk. Just the two of us. No lawyers." "There's nothing to talk about, Chloe," I said, my tone flat. "Yes, there is," she insisted. I miss you. I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. Julian is not the man I thought he was. He's shallow. He doesn't understand me like you did." It was a pathetic, transparent attempt at manipulation. She was testing the waters, seeing if the simple, devoted David she thought she knew was still in there somewhere, ready to be swayed by a few tears and a hollow apology. "I was lonely, David," she went on, her voice cracking. "You were always so distant, so wrapped up in your work. I just wanted to feel seen." "You were seen, Chloe," I said, the coldness in my voice surprising even myself. "You were seen having dinner with him. You were seen checking into hotels with him. You were seen kissing him on his balcony. You were seen quite clearly." She was silent for a moment. Then her tone hardened again. The mask had slipped back on. "Fine, be that way. But you will not take my home from me. I will see you in court. You will lose everything." She hung up. I saved the recording of the call and sent it to Mark. Her attempt at reconciliation, followed by an immediate threat, was just more fuel for our fire. The final confrontation was set for a formal mediation session, a last-ditch effort to avoid a court battle. Donovan had requested it, likely believing he could still intimidate us into a settlement. They had no idea what Mark and I had planned. This was not going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a demolition. We gathered in the same conference room. This time, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Chloe, Julian, and Eleanor were there, a united front of simmering resentment. Chloe shot me a look of pure hatred. She had convinced herself that she was the victim, that my methodical response was a cruel form of abuse. It was a stunning feat of self-delusion. Mark began. He didn't start with the infidelity. He started with the assets. My client is prepared to make a global offer to resolve this matter today, he said, his voice ringing with authority. Donovan smirked. This should be good. First, regarding the marital home at 124 Oak Street, Mark continued, opening a file. Your client is demanding full ownership. Unfortunately, that's not possible. The property is not owned by Mr. Miller. Donovan frowned. What are you talking about? His name is on the deed. No. Mark corrected him gently. The deed lists the owner as Oak Street Holdings, LLC. Mr. Miller has been renting the property from the LLC for the last 10 years. As of last month, the LLC has terminated the lease due to non-payment. Your client and her guest, he said, nodding briefly at Julian, are technically squatting. We have the eviction notice here, to be served at the conclusion of this meeting. He slid the document across the table. It was the first paper. Chloe stared at it, her mouth agape. What? That's our house. David, what is this? I remained silent. I kept my eyes forward. And who owns Oak Street Holdings, LLC? Donovan asked, his voice tight. My client is the sole member, Mark replied. Next item. Your client's employment. She is a real estate agent with Sterling Properties. Correct. Yes, Chloe said, still reeling from the first blow. I'm one of their top agents. That's also going to be a problem, Mark said, pulling out a second document. The office space Sterling Properties leases for its flagship downtown branch is located in the Meridian Tower. The Meridian Tower is owned by Apex Commercial Realty. My client is the sole owner of that corporation as well. It has come to our attention that your client has been using her position at a tenant company to attempt to defraud the building's owner in a personal matter. Not to mention the clear conflict of interest. We have already communicated this to the partners at Sterling. I believe they are terminating her contract. Effective immediately, it was the second paper. Chloe's face went white. She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading. He was staring at me now, a look of dawning horror on his face. He was finally starting to understand. Her mother, Eleanor, looked like she was going to faint. Now, Mark said, his voice dropping, becoming graver. Let's talk about Mr. Croft. He turned his attention fully to Julian. Mr. Croft, your primary development project, the Azure, is a beautiful building. A bit over-leveraged, perhaps, but ambitious. You secured your primary financing through a firm called Northwood Capital. Did you not? Julian just nodded, speechless. As you know, your loan covenants require you to maintain a certain level of personal liquidity and to avoid any public scandals that might damage the project's reputation. I'm afraid your association with this divorce, and your role in it, constitutes a significant reputational risk. Furthermore, we've been reviewing your project's financials. Mark paused for effect. Northwood Capital has decided to call in its loan. The demand letter is being messengered to your office as we speak. You have 30 days to secure alternate financing or the partnership will seize the asset. It was the third paper. Julian shot out of his chair. You can't do that. Who are you two? He stopped, his eyes locking with mine. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place in his mind. Who owns Northwood Capital? Donovan whispered, his voice barely audible. Mr. Miller isn't just an investor, Mark said, delivering the final blow. He is the silent majority partner. He founded the fund 5 years ago, The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Chloe stared at me, her expression a shattered mosaic of shock, betrayal, and a terrifying, nascent understanding of the scale of her mistake. The man she thought was a simple engineer, the man whose presence annoyed her, the man she wished would disappear, had just revealed himself to be the architect of her entire world. And he was now tearing it down brick by brick. I don't understand, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Why? I finally spoke, my voice devoid of heat or malice. It was the voice of an engineer stating a fact. You saw a simple life and called it a small one. You saw consistency and called it boring. You saw a husband and saw an obstacle. You made a calculation, Chloe. You decided to trade up. You just didn't have all the variables. You misjudged the structural integrity of your own plan. Julian, his face ashen, turned to Chloe. You told me he was a nobody. You told me he was just some guy who drew blueprints. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance. He was a man trying to save his own collapsing empire. Chloe dissolved into sobs, burying her face in her hands. Her mother, Eleanor, rushed to her side, glaring at me with impotent fury. You monster, she spat. Mark stood up. Our offer is this, he said to Donovan, who looked utterly defeated. We will not pursue your client for fraud. We will not sue for the dissipated marital assets. She will walk away with her personal belongings, her car, which is paid for, and her personal debt. She will sign a non-disclosure agreement and relinquish any and all claims to any of Mr. Miller's assets, personal or corporate, now and forever. That is the only offer on the table. You have 24 hours. We stood up and walked out, leaving the wreckage behind us. I didn't look back. The sound of her weeping faded as we walked down the hall. I felt no triumph, no joy, just a profound, hollow sense of quiet. The demolition was complete. A month later, I was standing in the empty living room of the house on Oak Street. All of her things were gone. The house echoed with a kind of peace I hadn't realized was missing for years. The eviction had been served, and she had moved out without a fight, taking refuge at her mother's house. Julian had declared bankruptcy. Sterling Properties had terminated her. She had signed Mark's agreement without a single amendment. I had decided to sell the house. I had no desire to live there anymore. It was a structure with a failed history. I walked through the rooms one last time, the memories feeling like old photographs of someone else's life. There was no anger left. There was only a quiet melancholy, a sadness for the man I used to be, the one who believed that love was a strong enough foundation to build anything on. He was gone. A more careful, more methodical man stood in his place. That evening, I was in my new apartment, a minimalist space with clean lines and a view of the city skyline that I had designed myself. Mark came over. I cooked a simple pasta dish and we opened a bottle of good red wine. We didn't talk about Chloe. We talked about work, about old college memories, about the future. On the table between us was a set of blueprints. They weren't for a skyscraper or a luxury condo. They were for a new public library in a low-income neighborhood, a project my company was designing and funding pro bono. It's a good design, Mark said, looking at the plans. Strong foundation, I nodded, taking a sip of wine. It's the most important part, I said. I looked out the window at the city lights, at the thousands of buildings standing tall against the night sky, each one a testament to good design, strong materials, and an understanding of the forces that can tear things apart. I had let the foundation of my own life erode. I would not make that mistake again. The past was a demolished site, cleared and ready for something new. It was time to start building again.